Welcome back to another great episode of Dreams, Dollar, and Destiny. I'm your co-host, Porcha Cooper, along with my some of my greatest friends. I have Mr. Nicholas Westbrook and Miss Malinda Valentine, and we're here to bring you another hot episode, right? With the topics that affect us most, especially when it comes to your dreams, your destiny, and most importantly, your dollars. So, also, I want to give a big shout out to those who have subscribed to our channel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're most grateful for you. And then also spread the love, right? Share this video out with someone that you know that can use this information, get it out to the community because everyone needs this message. Now, today, since Juneteenth is this month, right? And I don't know how many of you guys celebrate Juneteenth or how many people see it as a holiday, because personally I don't. But we wanted to bring up reclaiming our own identity, right? And the narrative that has been spent around slavery and our origins here in this country called America. Because when most people think of Black American history, the conversation usually starts with slavery, right? Everyone thinks that our origins are for there. And while that chapter in history may be undeniably important in some way, and trust me, we're not trying to forget it in any kind of way either. That's not the whole story, right? Black Americans we have rich, powerful history that is deeply complex and it stretches far beyond the plantation. And believe it or not all of us are from Africa, right? And so that title, African American, it really is not a one size fit all nomenclature, right? All of us are not from Africa, so that's another thing that's another myth that we're going to bust tonight. So we do have stories of ancient civilizations, extraordinary innovation right throughout history, and then fierce resistance, and then on top of that, we're artists at nature. So we definitely, as a community and as a people, we have unbreakable spirit that has survived and thrived through every attempt to suppress it. So yet somewhere along that way, the story got buried as far as our truth and been replaced by a narrative, or better yet, not replaced, but hijacked, right? I see it as a hijack of a narrative, our narrative of wealth and coming from kings and queens, where now we're coming from slaves and being paupers and never had anything, right? And so this often is an opposition to who we are as a people because we are excellent in nature, right? And so other groups of people have always trying to oppress, right, our spirit, our nature. And remember, the melanin in your skin is worth more than gold. So think about that alone, right? The wealth that you just have within your body. So it's important that we go beyond slavery to explore the full depth, the beauty, and the brilliance of the Black American story because our history, again, did not begin in change, y'all, right? That's not where it begins. And certainly we're not going to let it end here. So it's time that we do tell the full story. And I kind of like to start off with talking about a topic that we touched on in the last episode, where we were talking about the whitewashing of wealth. And we talked about like Peachtree Street, Atlanta. We talked about Tulsa, right? These cities that in the early 1900s that were really thriving. So I'm going to show you guys something really quickly because this really surprised me when I saw it. I was like, wow, obviously we didn't start with slavery, right? Something changed along the way from what I see here. So let me share my screen here. All right. Can you guys see my screen? So I just went in and asked AI because, like I said, if looking at the history of everything, how is it that Tulsa, Peachtree Street, all these places, now mind you, they said that slavery ended in 1865. These places were thriving by the late 1800s and early 1900s. So I asked whether or not, I said, other than Tulsa and Peachtree Street, what other Black cities and towns were thriving in the late 1800s? And you know what it came back and said? It said that there was a lot, right? There were actually many thriving Black towns and communities during that era. And here is a breakdown of just the significant ones. We have Boley, Oklahoma in the late 1800s. They began as a humbling farming community. By 1910, had transformed into a vibrant town of 4,000 African Americans supporting community businesses, banks, newspapers. They had it all, right? Oklahoma alone was home to 50 all Black towns by 1920. You have Rosewood, right? I'm sure people remember the movie Rosewood. That was founded in the 1800s. Of course, it was burned to the ground because of racially motivated massacre, just like most of these cities had ended, right? That seems to be the common thread between all of them. But, again, this was another thriving town, which allegedly was right after slavery. Houston, Texas, we had Freedmen's Town. I actually visited that area when I was living in Houston, and it's still there. There was a whole big city pushback because they were trying to take the area and redevelop, but the city of Houston fought that to preserve that area of that town. And again, it was thriving in the 1920s, and it was known as the Little Harlem. Durham, North Carolina had the Black Wall Street of the South, right? And they had hospitals, over 200 other Black owned businesses. So, look, another Black thriving town. Let's get to Harlem, right? Everybody knows about Harlem, all the Black excellence and everything that came out of Harlem in the early 1920s. It was known as the Black Mecca at that time. So there were thousands of people that migrated from the South to Harlem just to be in that energy, right? Then you had Mound Bayou, Mississippi, which was founded in 1887. So the list goes on and on and on, y'all. And look what it says right here at the end. This is what clinches. It says the pattern is remarkable. Black Americans consistently build thriving, self-sufficient communities from the ground up, only to have them systematically dismantled through violence, government policy, or economic sabotage. And the story deserves to be told. And that's why we're bringing this episode to you today, because we want to dispel the myth around our history and break the chains on the minds of people who think that we all of us are just descendants of slaves. So let's start there. I know I went into a long intro, but I wanted to bring this up so we have a foundation to start with.
So I'll go ahead and say peace and love to the Dreams, Dollars, and Destiny family. We are at episode 11, talking about beyond slavery, reclaiming the Black American story, reclaiming everything from our heritage, waking up to who we are. All of those things are very powerful, and all of those things are really taking place in full effect now. You did a brilliant intro, Portia, highlighting some of the discrepancies around the narrative that's been painted about Black Americans in this country. And it's really important because the narrative that's painted and pushed out and taught in the history books, that's reinforced daily through the media and the other 11 areas of activity, you know, it's a very strong narrative, and it's a strong narrative, stronger than the chains that were on us during slavery, to break the narrative off the minds of the American people of the correct history of how that unfolded. So, it's a really it's an uphill battle. Even just looking at some of the things that you see online today, you see that people who don't look like us are not invested in even knowing our history. They feel like what they learned in school was the correct thing, and they get these biases in their minds, and then they run with those things. And that kind of has created our narrative for the past 500 years. It's shifted the narrative about who we really are. But, now we're waking up to that. And, just looking at some of the things that you brought up proves, that, we're really prisoners of war. You know, People want to say slavery, slavery can be one part of it, but it's really being a prisoner of war on your own land. And then, of course, the 300,000 some odd Africans that were shipped here to the mainland, only 3% from the slave trade shipped to the mainland. Okay, only 3%, and that equals up to about 300,000 or so, amalgamated with the people who were already here. Okay. And that created this, what we now call the Black American nation, right? That amalgamation created who we are now as a nation. And again, that narrative on the history is framed, it's carefully framed, it was carefully thought out and carefully taught and spread, not only in the curriculum here in America, but curriculums outside of America too. That's a narrative that's spread. So it's very important to really do your studying about this. If this is something that has been nagging at you and you care about, you have to do your own studying. You have to do your own research. And this is going to be one of those episodes, family, where we are going to be bringing you facts. We're going to be giving you resources, books that you can start to read to start your journey on understanding your history and knowing that the narrative that's being set about you is not the truth. Okay. And I think a lot of us do know that. A lot of us are waking up to that now, but a lot of us still don't know. And a lot of us don't care. So you're going to have a little bit of each, but it is something that we should all care about if you care about your future and if you care about your children having a future, in this nation. It's something that you definitely need to, pay attention to and be aware of. And the more that we can educate ourselves on that and educate ourselves on the proper history, the better that we will feel about ourselves. Because then you start to realize a lot of the things are just flat out lies. And I'll just break right there and let Nick do his opening.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. Peace and love to the Triple D family. It's great to be back on this master number episode, master number 11. And this is a very important conversation that we're having. And in my opening, I would like to address the reasons and the implications for the pushing of the slavery narrative. So, of course, it's deeply embedded in the education system, and oftentimes our education starts with slavery when we're in school. Maybe we might take a little bit of world history, which is only a teeny tiny bit of the history that we learn when we're in school. But this conversation is important because the effects of the overemphasis of the slavery narrative creates a victim mentality and victimhood within our people. And then it also creates or adds on to the sense of superiority that the quote unquote dominant culture has. So they may not outright say it, but they're empowered, knowing that they oppressed a certain group of people or have power over a certain group of people. And as this narrative is continuing to be perpetuated, it further deepens that false identity of being superior and melanated people being inferior. Now, this narrative isn't just pushed forth by the education system and the dominant culture. It also comes from our own people. But oftentimes it comes from a place of good intention, but the good intention ends up having detrimental effects, or it's the wrong way of going about teaching our history. I remember growing up and over the years seeing that our people teach this narrative from a perspective of almost shaming us into behaving ourselves by saying, "Oh, look at what we went through. Look how we've been beaten and treated so harshly. So because of that, y'all need to stop saying the N word and y'all need to stop refusing to read and learn, because look what we went through in order to get get what we have now." So a lot of people push forth that slavery narrative because of that. And to add on to that, the media is very powerful. Over the years, we've seen a plethora of slavery TV shows, movies, just to name a few over the years. We've had Roots, that was a very popular one. That was a family saga. Slavery was part of that family saga. It went beyond slavery, but that's what most people remember about Roots, is the slavery parts about Roots. It just took up so much of the story that it's been deeply implanted in our minds. So we have Roots, we had Goodbye Uncle Tom, we have Glory, Emancipation, Harriet, Django Unchained, Lincoln, Birth of a Nation. And people might, for a moment we thought Birth of a Nation might break away from that narrative, but you see how it ends with how the Nat Turner story ends. So, it's like a moment of glory, but it ends in tragedy. So, and
Well,
these
good
are
for
these
abuse of slave.
these are movies stemming
Yeah.
from like the 70s and the 80s all the way into the 2020s. So in the 2020s, we're still having movies about slavery being made, even though our history is so rich and extensive, and it goes beyond that. And we have to keep in mind and remember who runs the Hollywood and the entertainment industry and who's funding these films. So when you follow the money, you see who's really behind the curtain, who's the hidden hand, and it's usually someone who doesn't have our best interests at heart. So it's a part of deprogramming ourselves from that slavery narrative is approaching it from multiple perspectives and areas. So the education, the media, the entertainment, everything. So I'll close with that.
And you're right, Nick. And it's funny you touched on Roots because I was going to bring that up next, just to show the people. Roots was plagiarized, right? It got exposed, and that was the one thing that they brainwashed our people with in the 70s, and that's how that slave narrative really started taking off from there. Because prior to Roots, you didn't have too many slave narrative type of movies that were showing our people in that type of light. And remember, they had the audience captivated over days, right? That was like a mini series, so people were just glued to the TV, right, thinking this was real life. This is this man's family life in that snapshot of history, just to find out that it faced significant plagiarism accusations. And if it wasn't true, right, that the story wasn't plagiarized, then why did he settle out of court? Right, so 1978, author and anthropologist Harold Corlander sued Alex Haley, in federal court, claiming that Roots copied heavily from his 1967 novel, The African. Corlander pointed out more than 80 parallel passages, as well as striking similarity in plot, character types, and specific expressions. Y'all, do you see the level of diabolicalness that happens, right? Look how despicable these people are. And remember, these movies produce images that are now engraved in your mind. So now we have brainwashed a culture of people, right, into this narrative and believing that this is all they are and this is what they came from. And then on top of that, the education system, like Mr. Westbrook pointed out, it reinforces that because remember, Rockefeller was the one that started the education system. And did you think he loved niggers? No, right? So we were marginalized even at the inception of the American education system. Because remember, the American education system is just there to produce workers in general anyway, no matter the color of your skin. But then from there, the black population got even more further marginalized because they thought less of us more so than even the poor white people. So we were never counted as being superior, having intellect, being able to be self-sufficient, self-sustaining, financial powerhouses. But we have proved them wrong time and time again throughout history. And what really just makes me mad about the situation is that I just rattled off over 10 cities, right? That was over 10. I just rattled off on the list that were there during the 1920s. We had our own financial economic system that were always dismantled so we could never have wealth of our own. And that just goes to show you of the evilness, right, of this dominant culture and how they always try to keep their boot on our neck by always threading the same story that we don't come from nothing, we'll never have nothing, we'll never be anything. And the slave narrative just really just keeps reinforcing that same narrative.
So absolutely, absolutely. And it's not surprising that Roots movie was plagiarized because it's all a bunch of bullshit and lies anyway. But what ends up happening is, like you said, once that narrative gets pushed out and all these millions of people are going to see this movie, it doesn't matter that it's a lie. It doesn't matter that it's plagiarized. the impact is already felt, right? So that narrative is already set, that seed is already planted in everyone's minds, and then on top of that, it's reinforced through the rest of the areas of activity. So it's reinforced through law, it's reinforced through education, it's reinforced through the labor, through economics, through war, through religion. It's reinforced in all these years. Think about compound interest for people who are mathematicians and all that. Think about how interest compounds over time. So narratives and visions in your mind and stories are no different than how interest compounds. Those things compound in your mind over time, and they're passed down through generations, right? And then it's continued to be reinforced and reinforced. And what I really want to just bring up, right now is, because you were talking about like how after slavery, well, he said this and that and third, and it's true. It's just like the inferiority narrative is such bull crap. Because when we look at it, if we look at 1870 to 1940, this was known as the golden age of invention. Okay, this was known as the golden age of invention, and Black Americans accounted for over 50,000 patents during this time frame. That's a lot of damn patents. That's a lot of inventions. If I were to go through some of the list of the things we invented, it's all of the things that we utilize in modern day to have comfort, right? To be comforted, and to things that you need, things you need to survive, refrigerators and different things like that. The refrigerator car to transport the goods, all that kind of stuff was created by the people of the land, and that is us. And then you can even just look through their own documents. I mean, you know, they kept immaculate documents, right? But you can't find the slave voyage documents. A lot of those are gone because they never existed, right? But what you do see is you see the you see the intra-Americas slave trade, you see that. You also see things through the census after the country became a country and they started taking a census. And you can see through the census how they just systematically erased our history and erased our identity and erased who we are through the census. And I've done this work. I've done my genealogy. You know what I'm saying? So I've gone back, and going back to the 1870 census and found my family members where there was an I, but they changed it to a B. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of our family are on these dolls rolls. And right now, while we're talking about that, I just want to show this one book that you guys can get and look at to see, because it has your family names in it. If your family name was an American Indian name, it's going to be in this book. This book is called The Black America's Handbook for Survival Through the 21st Century, The Forgotten Truth Behind Racism in America, The Secret Heritage of America. Okay, and this book is by Redeem A. America. And as you can see, it has the emblem of America on the cover. And that emblem of America is a Black American woman. And this can be looked up. This is in a British museum. So this stuff can be easily debunked. It can be easily looked up. But one of the main issues, again, and I'll put this up again, one of the main issues that we're contending with is the media and the reinforcement of this narrative. Okay. And it's the reinforcement and it's the spreading of this narrative, because in order to have someone be supreme, someone has to be inferior. So you have to punch down on someone. And Black Americans have been getting punched down on since 1492. So, we've been getting punched down on, we've been getting reclassified. And if a people weren't shit, then why the hell would you waste your time continuing to reclassify them, to lie to them, to subjugate them, to oppress them, to keep them out of everything? And then after we fought for our own slavery and our own freedom. We fought for our own freedom. So that's another narrative that we could get into about the Juneteenth, because it's like, oh, the Union freed the slaves. No, the slaves freed the slaves. They needed us. They were losing the war, and they needed us in order to win the war. So we said, well, we're not fighting for you unless you free us. So we struck that deal with Lincoln to make him do it, because he said himself, if he could win the war without freeing us, he would have done so. He says that itself. So a lot of it is willful ignorance, and a lot of it is people don't want to learn the truth, because then you have to change your narrative, and then you have to change the way that you think about things, and then you get to see, oh, everyone wants to say we're a victim culture. Well, we are the damn victim, but that doesn't mean that we stay as the victim culture. But we are the victims of it. But then again, we're not going to stay there, because that's not the narrative of who we are. We're builders, and we know how to build, and we've built the country. And like I said, from 1870 to 1940, we held 50,000 patents. Now, out of those 50,000 patents, over half of those were stolen from us. They were stolen from us and, put through where we don't get the credit for it. You know what I'm saying? So all of these different things that go on to reinforce this narrative. And they do this through reinforcing the narrative through the known 9 areas of activity, plus the last 2 that I have added. I'm just going to state them real quick and then I'll move on. These areas of activity, matter of fact, let me put them on the screen for us. Actually, nope, I ain't going to put them on the screen. I ain't going to do that. I'm just going to read what they are.
Hidden Figures, Queen, when you talked about how they live off our labor, because in that movie they showed that those 4 black women were the ones operating NASA. But these men were just fronting.
Of course, they can't build it. They can't do none of that without us. They can't build anything without us. All of that's based on our blueprint. Okay, our minds. You can even look now. There's a bunch of Black American kids across the nation that are super geniuses. They're like super geniuses. They're like 8 years old with that's because it's our genius. And see, when we look at people like Michael Jackson, right, and how he did what he did, the greatness of who he is. Why? Because he had his Black American family intact. See, even J. Edgar Hoover said the Black American family is the greatest threat to this nation. Yeah, because when we're intact and we're on our stuff, we cannot be stopped. And we could all be Michael Jackson. But see, they don't want that. And that's why they do the things they do to us. And they reinforce this narrative through these 11 areas of activity, which are economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, war and counter war. And then the 2 that I've added on are health and agriculture. Okay. So these are the areas of activity what the media uses to reinforce their narrative that we are nothing but a slave class of people and we're inferior. So that's what they do. And if you guys want to know more about those 11 areas of activity, again, we told y'all we were giving you resources. Go get with Neely Fuller, who wrote the 9 areas of activity. He wrote the code. This is the code book. Look how thick it is. And this is just one of them. There's like 2 of them. And there's also a workbook where it tells you which each word means and how to use these words, because what we say is important. How we say things are important. And this is called the Compensatory Counter Racist Code, okay, by Neely Fuller Jr., who, rest in peace to Dr. Fuller. Rest in peace to him and Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, our pioneers. But yeah, I'm going to land right there.
Yeah, and just to add on real quick for those inventions and the patents, a resource for that is Black People Invented Everything by Sujin Das, better known as Dr. Supreme Understanding.
That's good. Well, and it all goes back to the fact that we were here before they were here, right? So really, if anybody wants a good book, they came before Columbus. I don't know if you guys can see that, maybe a little white on my screen, but they came before Columbus. Yeah, it's not gonna come up, but there it is. Yeah, they came before Columbus is always a great book to start with to find out about our origins that started before the slavery narrative, right? Because we were here before they were here. Remember, people of color are always indigenous to the land. The Europeans are not, right? So everywhere they go, they cause misery, destruction, oppression, and then also repression of the people that are already there, right? And then they try to get you to assimilate into their culture somewhat so they can manipulate you from there. And it's been a story that they run, it's a play that they run everywhere that they land, right? It doesn't matter what area, what culture, anywhere on the earth they land, they try to imprint their own system and class system on a group of people. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out, which I found that was really interesting, is that they actually found some remains of Black Americans at the Alabama mounds, right? Because when they pulled those remains, they were thinking, oh, they're probably going to be just the Native Americans or whatever. And it shocked the shit out of them to find out that these were actually Black people that were ancient or indigenous to the land in Alabama. Now, why they find that shocking, I don't know, but that just goes to show you that we predate this country, right? So a lot of us, or some of us, were already here before the whole slavery thing started going down. And just as Queen pointed out, there was only 3% of the slaves that came from Africa that actually made it here on land anyway. And a lot of them wound up in the Caribbean islands and stuff, right? Haiti, Jamaica, and all those areas. So we also have to keep that in mind. So with that being said, with us being oppressed through every part of the system, it is hard for you to believe or to even conceive that you come from greatness, because they show you every day that you come from nothing. And so we're here to uplift that spirit within you, and for you to reclaim your history and your sovereign wealth and your identity of who we are, which are kings and queens. We ruled this area, we ruled this land way before this country was even in inception. So at this point, we really need to go back to that, because this whole Juneteenth shit, right? That's the whole reason why we brought it up, because it's not even, it's a made up holiday. Why would we celebrate days that we were slaves, right? It doesn't even make sense. So why would they want to keep running that play on you every year? Is because they want you to never forget what you so-called history is, and it's not that.
Also, we weren't technically free on Juneteenth either. They just made an announcement that we were free, but the the oppression, the persecution, it continued. I talked about that in my Juneteenth presentation last year on BTV about the aftermath of that announcement and how that only enraged white people even more to either transform slavery into other forms or to just brutalize us even more.
Yeah, and I want to just share a video on that. So Nick is absolutely correct. If you guys missed that last year on Juneteenth, go over to BTV and watch the episode that Nick and I did last year on Juneteenth. I also have other episodes over there on BTV where I'm talking about all of this. I did my own Juneteenth episode on Justice on Earth, where there's a timeline and it shows you, what actually happened that day. But right now, I'm going to just share a video that just breaks that down a little more for people so they can understand a little bit more about that. And then I think, I think that'll be good. Let me just try to add this to the stage and cross my fingers that it's going to work. Okay. Hold on.
Lincoln didn't free the slaves, and General Gordon Granger was accompanied by as many as 10,000 black Union troops when he read General Order 3 in Texas on June 19th, 1865. So on this Juneteenth, let's get the facts right, y'all. So check it out. When the Emancipation Proclamation was enacted on January 1st, 1863, it only applied to the Confederate States, which was also a different country. Also, it didn't free any black folks in border states who remained with the Union. States like Missouri, Delaware, and Maryland still enslaved us. And secondly, fam, Lincoln didn't fight in the war. So that freedom was contingent upon those black soldiers helping the Union win the war, which they did. If they didn't win, the Confederacy would have kept slavery, and Lincoln likely would have kept slavery within those border states. And Lincoln didn't propose the 13th Amendment, which would effectively ban enslavement forever. That was actually House Republican from Ohio, James Ashley. And let's not act like black people hadn't been freeing themselves since 1526, since Stono, since Nat Turner, since Harriet Tubman. What the Emancipation Proclamation provided was a trade-off that said, if you help us maintain the Union, then we'll provide support to protect widespread freedom for black folks. All right, now let's get to Union General Gordon Granger, who delivered news of the Emancipation Proclamation on June 19, 1865 at Galveston, Texas. He did a great thing, but he also came with about 10,000 black Union troops who went throughout Texas to enforce the proclamation and freedom, because our freedom could not be secured without military enforcement. So why don't we talk about brothers who accompanied General Gordon Granger, like Sergeant Major Minkins, for example? On this Juneteenth, let's shed light on black freedom fighters who first freed themselves and fought for our freedom, like the 28th Indiana, 29th Illinois, and combined New York 26th and 31st regiments of the U.S. colored troops. Let's get it right this year, y'all. And oh yeah, your child can learn more important Black history facts like this by taking the College Board's first ever AP African American Studies course. You can sign them up for this.
All right, enough about the course, because I don't know if that's still up, so I don't want to leave that up there. But yeah, so that was pretty much the gist of the history for Juneteenth. And like Nick said, and just like Brother Krim said, we weren't freed on that day. It took another at least 1 to 2 years of those Black soldiers going around announcing that, guys, stop working. Like we ain't doing this no more. So again, that date was just the date that it was basically announced in Galveston, Texas. And then from there on, like we said, we freed ourselves. Everything that we've done in this country, we've done for ourselves. We've not had any handout. We have not had any help like a lot of the other nations that come to this country and get, based off some of the things that we fought for and some of the resources that we have secured for ourselves. So to say that, to say, this is our opportunity to take back that narrative. Okay. We have to be the sole controllers of our own narrative, and we have to teach and educate our children across all 11 areas of activity of not only our true history, but also the true history of the dominant society that continues to try to oppress us, even to this very day that we're airing this episode. So this is very important. It's very important to know who you are and to know that you are a builder and you are a master builder and that you belong here. I'm going to say this real quick. Growing up, and I believe a lot of us have this similar thing growing up, because growing up, you don't really know, you just can feel it. You can feel it, right? But you don't really know what's happening. You don't know why you're being treated that way. I was very conscious when I was little. So when I'm like, why are they treating us like that? Like, what the hell did we do to these people? Like, this was a question. And even when I showed you this book, I know we all felt similar because she writes about that in this book. She writes about her experience growing up and just knowing like something ain't right. It's not right. It didn't sit right in our spirit. Like, why are you doing this to us? Like, what did we do to deserve this treatment? And, what ends up happening is you find out why as you grow up and you start feeling more of what's going on and you start researching and you start learning on your own, you start understanding why it's like that. Because they have to continue to perpetuate this lie so they can stay in the position that they're in and so that the land isn't returned back to its rightful owners. And so what do? You bully those rightful owners. You put them as the bottom class. You bring a bunch of immigrants in and you make them the buffer class to also subjugate those people. And that's what we're going through right now with all this, like the Asian boycott and all that kind of stuff. It's all by design, family. And when we realize that we're all we got, the sooner we realize that, the better off we'll be. And then we can start changing these narratives. But before that, it's just going to be a bunch of disjointed, effort and disjointed things that aren't really coming together to make the necessary change that we need to make. And we need a blueprint. We need a plan. And I do have one, but I ain't going to say it right now. So I'm going to let y'all go ahead. But we need a plan. We need a blueprint. Yeah. And the first part of that is doing your research, doing your education, do your genealogy. I told people on the Universal 7-month energy report that I did on Numeralytics, I said, this is a great month to do your genealogy. If you've been stuck, if you were doing it, because in the 7 energy, first of all, it's spiritual energy. So that's our number anyway, right? That's our number anyway, spiritual energy. And what's hidden comes to the light. And then also we're going into the month, into the zodiac sign of Cancer, where it's dealing with family, ancestry, memory. This is an excellent time to do your genealogy. Get started. Just go. I have plenty of resources, familysearch.com, ancestry.com, all of these places. And forget about DNA, because that's the DNA that they use. The part of the DNA test that they use is not the part of the DNA test that can really tell you who you are. They leave that part out too. The part they use are just for entertainment purposes only, and the test tells you that. So we start discerning, which is one of the 7 cultural central principles. we can discern that, we can understand that. Oh, but the DNA don't prove it. Well, they're not using the right DNA now, are they? So there's different haplogroups that you have to look at when you really want to look at where somebody originated from. And that's the part that they leave out. So when you do education and research, can't nobody pull a wool over your eye. And that's the where I want the family to get to.
Yeah,
Our
that's a
land.
good idea to do the DNA and for them to find out their own family history and see where, their own origins are. Nick, were you about to add something?
Yeah, just real quick, I was going to say not only are the youth conscious of the mistreatment, but they're also, well, the more conscious of the youth, they're also aware of the education too. Like I've heard, because I work with teenagers, young people, I've heard them discuss and wonder, why are we talking about slavery so much? So I just wanted to add that.
Well, and that's true because they keep reinforcing that story in their minds. So now it's ingrained that they come from slaves, and they're. But that's not a one size fit all kind of story for all of us because we're all very diverse. We come from different backgrounds, different origins, different countries. All of us are not from this land. All of us are not from Africa. As a matter of fact, if you try to go to Africa now and put African American on your passport, the Africans are going to strike out African on your passport and leave American, right? Because you ain't nothing African if you're from here. So, just like the Queen said, they've always tried to reclassify us, misclassify us, try to put us in a box, try to identify us to be this and that, always trying to marginalize us like we're the minorities, like we don't count, like our vote doesn't matter, right? And they're always trying to suppress our wealth, our collectiveness, right? Anytime we try to get together and have anything, they try to take it away. It's easily dismantled. And it's really interesting point that we bring up the fact that Juneteenth, right? Even though the alleged word came out that slaves really weren't freed until 2 or 3 years later, and what came after that was the Reconstruction era, right? And so this was supposed to be the time of prosperity for black people after slavery. And yeah, there were some people that did rise to prominence. Like some people did held office in their communities, their states, and things like that, even within the federal government. But once the federal government removed any military presence from the southern states, it went back to business as usual, right? They went back to the Jim Crow. So what happened? Once the federal government moved out the way, we as Black people came together and we built our own self-sufficient communities. Those are the communities that I keep referring to back in the early 1920s and 1930s that was systematically destroyed by these other cultures. We did it brilliantly, right? They could take a master class from us on how you can build a society because we started from the bottom and then we were here, right? We were at the top. So obviously, innately, we are builders, right? We are leaders. We are the original agricultures of this land. But somehow or another, we get this other story that we come from nothing. And if you don't leave in, if you today, if you hadn't heard anything else in what we said, please take heart in the fact that you come from royalty, right? We have wealth. The wealth was taken from us, and now it's time for us to reclaim it. And now, in this day and age, we can build again, right? There are so many resources that we can use in order to rebuild our wealth again and come together as a community to have our own, right? Go get some land, go live sovereign off the land, live off the grid, and we can build a community and have our own just like we did back in the day. Now, another thing is Queen brought up, if you wanted to go and look in your own personal origin, how you can look in your ancestry chart and pull that information up. But if you want to find out the destruction of Black civilization, like what actually happened over the course of millennia, right? Because this is nothing new. What we're talking about didn't start in America, right? The destruction and to the bring down the Black people as a whole, as a culture, started thousands of years ago, right? They always wanted what we had, and they have usurped us every time to take what we have to claim it to be theirs. Just like this is our land, they're claiming it to be their land. It's not. Remember, they are immigrants. They came here on a boat, and it's documented that they came here on a boat. We were here before. You can't tell me that these people came to this country and no one was here, right? And it even is documented that they had to massacre a lot of Native Americans and people who were here, who were indigenous to this land, in order to claim the land. So, like I said,
You muted yourself, Portia. You muted yourself.
another thing that they had to do was actually Another thing that we need to look at is this book. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it is The Conspiracy to Destroy the Black Woman, because that's where it had to start, right? They had to bring down Big Mama in order to bring us down as a people. Because remember, just like Queen said, if we're a family unit, we're indestructible, right? They can't mess with us, right? When we come together as a fist, when we're fingers, you can do whatever. But when we come together as a mighty fist, we can throw a mighty blow. So we can organize as a family as one, but they had to bring down the Black woman. And as you can see, systematically that was done. Even in my lifetime, I see the change in the type of woman that's being portrayed. When I was a kid, we had Claire Huxtable, right? Now these children got love and hip hop. Vast difference in the type of woman that's being portrayed now through the rappers, through the music, right? We had Anita Baker, we had classy women, right? They're always presenting themselves, always poised. Diane Carroll, like we can go down the list of poised Black women from the past and look at what we got now and all the ratchetness. So this is definitely a good book to start with because they have systematically brought us down through the divine feminine, right? Because the divine feminine is what really controls the race, right? This is the mother. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
The queen was going in so hard, she muted herself. She was going in.
You know that energy be trying to cut you off, right? That's the ghost in the machine.
Yeah, yeah, because when the gods are building, the devil always appears. So that's something to think about. That's something to remember for the people. Because when you're doing something positive, you're building, the devil will always appear to try to tear you down and tear that down. And right now, I just want to just talk about a little bit about like the Reconstruction era real quick. And I'm just going to put this slide up and read it because I think it's so important because everyone's talking about like how we ain't nothing, we didn't do nothing, we didn't build nothing, we're just slaves, we're just ignorant and stupid. Well, I'm going to beg to differ
What
because
else also impressed me, Queen, I don't mean to cut your wisdom, is how quick we did it, right? Because remember, we
yeah,
keep going back to the fact that the slavery announcement wasn't to 1865, but they didn't get the word to 2 or 3 years later. And you mean to tell me they had wealth and thriving cities by the early 1900s?
that's right. That's right. And right now, we're going to get into it a little bit because this period that I'm talking about is 5 years after the Civil War ended. So this is 5 years after 1865, right? So this is 1870 to 1940. This is dubbed as the golden age of invention. Okay. So with 50,000 total patents, Black people accounted for more inventions during this period than immigrants from every other country except England and Germany. Now, let me give you the caveat. People living in the United States contributed disproportionately to this rate and to this rise of invention. So 87% of all inventions during the golden age of invention were born and came out of people in the United States. Okay. 87% of those inventions, again, are traced to us. Now, 2.7% of those inventions were invented by Black Americans, which is a larger number than nearly every other immigrant group except two. And then what I did with the research, I said I would double our number. So from 2.7, I would double that. Okay. I would double that to 6.4 because a lot of our inventions that we did invent got stolen by either the white people that we had to go through to get the patent. You still had to go through, like there's lawyers, there still was things you had to go through to get this stuff through. And oftentimes that was stolen from us. So that wasn't even like attributed to us. So at least half of those things were stolen from us. So we double that down on the inventions and opportunities that were robbed, stolen, and cheated away from us. That would round us up to about, well, it says 3.4, but I'm saying like 6.4. And then we beat those other nations, right? So we really invented more throughout the golden age of invention than any other nation that came here. And there were setbacks because, again, they were stealing things. And you can see it right here on this chart. Right here is where all Black Americans is 2.7% of all inventions. And then Germany here, 5.2, and England, 3.2. Those are the only two immigrant groups that beat us out. Every other immigrant group was below 2.7. And then if we add in, like I said, all of the stuff that these people over here, the white Americans, stole, that probably doubles this number, if not triples it. Okay, so this is what I want to point out to people, that this is the type of stuff that we had to go through. And look at this. I'm just going to read this one. No credit and reward. Born into slavery in Kentucky in 1802, after purchasing his own freedom in 1826, he invented a quarter bed created with wooden rails connected to the headboard and footboard. So everyone that goes to sleep tonight on the bed can thank Henry Boyd. The Black Americans invented the bed, the platform bed. The Boyd bedstead was so popular that historian Carter G. Woodson profiled his success in his iconic book, The Miseducation of the Negro. Racist realities of the time apparently led him to believe that he wouldn't be able to patent his invention. So what he did was he ultimately decided to let his partner, a white craftsman, patent it, because he didn't believe, and see, this goes back to our mindset, he didn't believe he could do it. So he just said, you patent it for me. But he created this. He created that. Okay, so this is just one of many examples. This is just one of many stories of examples where this happened. And here's another one. I won't read it, but it's up there, but there's many more, right? So we have all these examples now of knowing that we are builders, knowing that things were taken from us, things were systematically shut out and oppressed from. This is like redlining of the day, right? Stopping you from putting your invention through the patent system, so it's the same old story. And it's something that Nick said, that they keep changing the way that they do things. So slavery never really ended, it just evolved. It evolved to a modern day system, it evolved to modern day tactics, and now they have the use of technology that they can also employ to help them to further create and spread the false narrative of our inferiority.
Yeah, I mean, we can go on and on about those inventors that didn't get credit, and how many Black people behind the scenes that have put their life's work up only to not get paid in any shape, form, or fashion. I even get a mention. I remember a story. There was a lady, I think she was in her early 20s. I can't remember, but she made a vaccine for a cure of some disease. And mysteriously, she died, right, at 23. And the white man took her credit from there. So did he kill her? Who knows, right? Because they didn't do an autopsy, they didn't do any of that. But she came up with the cure. I can't remember which disease it was that she came up with the cure with, but yeah, that her idea was taken from there, where her invention was taken from there, and he got all the credit. So it just goes on and on. And again, we like to put out the fact that our past is not our prison and our future is not their narrative, right? Now it's time for us to reclaim our own story and rewrite the future in a different light. As you can see, we have a lot to stand on. We have a lot of ancestors in our corner who have built wealth before in a matter of minutes, right? It seems like to me, if you're telling me that these people were slaves and within 10, 20 years, they were able to build cities and communities and businesses that were actually thriving, and they didn't need anybody outside of them that didn't look like them to support them. We can do the same now, right?
Right now, not now, right now.
That's what I'm saying. Like, as a matter of fact, we have all the tools and resources at our fingertips that we can do that at this very moment. But at the end of the day, we must look to the past in order to realize where we're going in the future, and know that our past, right, what they wrote is not our truth. And you don't have to subscribe to that story at all. You can rewrite your own family history from here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say that, especially now with the times that we're in, and how the attacks seem to be ramping up, and things are worse than they have been in past years, especially when we're talking about the state of race relations, and the president of the United States and all the things that he's trying to do. I feel like it's not only an opportune time, but it's going to force us into an uncomfortable position, because that's honestly, that's one of the things that we need. So it's kind of like a blessing and a curse, in the sense that it's forcing us to be uncomfortable, because that's what, when we study history, that's what was going on back then. It was we turn the darkness into light, because yeah, things were really rough back then. So I think in more contemporary times we've become comfortable in our state. Like, yes, the form of slavery transformed me or evolved into something else, but it evolved into a system in which we we feel comfortable in a sense. I had a quote from one of the newsletters that I had. I might pull it up during in the closing, but essentially the uncomfortability that we're going through now, it should force us into getting back into self-reliance and doing for our own and doing for ourselves.
That's true.
I absolutely think it's going to force us back into that. And then just to reinforce that notion of what you're talking about, Nick, just want to share this one last thing, and then that'll be my closing out. And I think, this is one of the ways that we can, have an action plan, have a blueprint for how that looks. Because Nick is correct. Back then we didn't have a choice but to stick to with each other. You know, all of that ended when integration started coming around and all that. Then that's when our power, which is in the dollar, started being siphoned in out of the community, right? They terrorized all the Black communities that Portia named in the beginning, and then we integrated, and then our power and resources started to get siphoned out. So now that some of these things are starting to come back around, like Nick said, everything is cyclical. So everything's coming back around now. We're being forced back into supporting each other, standing in for each other, and being there for each other. And one thing that I want to point out is the 70 cultural ascension principles. These are state levels that we can be at and that we can utilize to get ourselves out of this and become a real nation. This is a nation building plan. Okay, so there's different levels that we could be at on any different time. And right now, well, we've been in the dormant phase. We're coming out of the dormant phase. The next phase is to dedicate and delineate yourself so you can work on yourself. And that means putting yourself first and putting your community first. That's what that means. Then you have discussions like we're doing tonight and like there's going on the internet. You have to discuss things with people, with others even. And then once you have those discussions, you better be using your discernment within those discussions to see who's really on your side and who is not, who is down for the truth and who is not. This discernment is highly valuable to the 70 cultural ascension principle state level. Okay, because without discernment, you're not going to be able to document properly what's going on. When you get to discernment, you're at a high active state. Okay. Now you want to document. This is documentation. This is writing laws. This is writing bills. This is doing all that stuff that you need to create a community. Write your community rules, your community bylaws. This is what we need to do. Document the atrocities that are happening to us. Document the businesses that we don't want to deal with because we're not respected as a human being from these people. All that stuff needs to be documented. And then once you're doing all that, now you can start developing. That means now you're developing your own store, you're developing your own school, you're developing your own hospitals, you're developing your own industries to be self-sustainable within your community. And once you do that, now you can deploy. Now that's deployment in a military unit. Like Nick said before, and like Mr. Krim said, you have to have a military unit to protect your nation. All nations have it. So we have to have that. And the deployment is also deploying ourselves out into the cities and the streets and making sure that we're protecting one another and taking care of each other. So I wanted to share that with the people. And then I'm going to take that down. And the next thing I want to do is share just a couple more resources. If you guys don't know who Dr. Claude Anderson is, I'm going to implore you to get his books. A lot of what we talked about, he writes about. This is Black Labor, White Wealth. And this is going to really talk to you about all of those things that Portia was talking about in the beginning and some of the other stuff that we were talking about. And then this is his other book that I want to share called Powernomics, because this is an economic blueprint. So just like I just showed a blueprint that we can do as a nation to nation build, this is the economic blueprint to nation build. It's an excellent book. It has excellent resources, and it has history in it. It has our history and our facts of all the things we went through and what they did to economically cripple us as a nation. So that's there. And then the last book that I want to share as a part of my resources is The Voice of the Ancestors. This is a young brother, and that's why I'm sharing this, because he's a young brother. His name is Chase McGee, and he's a young brother who is doing the thing, and he wrote this has 3 volumes to it. He also has other books. One of them called The 19 White Men That the 19 Explorers That Came to America and Saw Black Americans. Okay. So I'm not saying that title right, but if you look him up, you'll find his other books. So those are my resources. And I just want the family to know, I continue to say this on every platform that I can say it on. Listen, it's only up to us to decide. When we get ready and we get ready to move, things will move. But until we're all properly ready for that, it's going to continue to be stagnated. It's going to be disjointed, and it's going to be a bit chaotic. So I see it. We're almost there. All this stuff happening it's pushing us to the brink. And listen, when we get ready, family, listen, can nothing stop you. You're unstoppable. You're unstoppable when you get ready, because this is your land. And really, the land is waiting for you to come reclaim it. And that's how we reclaim our story.
You made a good point, though. They have weakened our people, because I think of from the 60s, the militant Black Panther groups and how they would organize, but they would be very militant in their organization, right? They were like a fortress. They were impenetrable. But we don't wrote, but we don't, but we don't do that anymore, right? We don't together. And even through the music, because remember the beginning of hip hop, it was higher infinite power healing our people. And when hip hop first came around, it was about building our people, gods, right? And goddesses, and the 5%, the 5%ers in the nation, and all that good stuff. And then systematically, that message has gotten watered down by the you know who's, right? In order to placate us and to pacify us and to put us back in that underling position to where we don't want to fight anymore, right? So I think we need to get back to that. And just like what Queen was saying, we need to get back to being more militant and more vigilant about our people and our community, and building our own sovereign wealth outside of this matrix, right, that has been placed on us. So the question of the night, we always ask a question every episode, right? And how are you going to dive into your own Black history, right? Queen mentioned that, maybe you should do your own ancestry. Are you going to look at the origin of your city, see where some prominent Black wealth has originated somewhere in your state? Like, it's time to really go back and find your own Black history, whether it's your own family history or it's history related to your state and Black wealth. Like, we really need to know, and start posting that information out on social media, because the more you put out there, the more people get to know what our true story is. So we need to start telling our own story and stop allowing those to tell it for us. So definitely, we look forward to hearing more about that from you guys in our comments. Please put that in there. Does anyone else have a closing, any closings that they like to say? Nick, do you want to close out?
Yes, I would. And I found that quote that I was thinking of, and it comes from writer and computer scientist Gurwinder Bhogal on the danger of mediocre problems. Often we fail to improve our lives simply because things don't get bad enough. If your new job is hell, you'll leave it. But if it's just unsatisfying, you'll likely grind it out. Thus, small problems often threaten our quality of life more than big ones. So that is a reflection of our condition and what we've been experiencing on these lands of America. During these contemporary times, we just been grinding out these unsatisfying conditions. But with the direction that the country is going in, where things are becoming bad enough to where we're like, oh shit, like we need to get it together and come to that point of rebuilding like we did during those early 1900s and 1920s. So I just wanted to share that. And then in my closing, I want to say that this was a great conversation, first of all, and I love how balanced it was, how we touched on both the history, but also the economics, and pair this conversation with our previous episodes, and when we talked about the finances as well, and the action steps towards that, because the other kind of trap that our people fall into, we go from one extreme to the other when it comes to the education. We, on one extreme or one end of the spectrum, we overemphasize the slavery narrative, but on the other end of the spectrum, we go so hard on the history and talking about our glorious past and all the great things that we did in the past that we stay there. Just talking about what we did, hundreds of thousands of years ago, talking about what we did in ancient Kemet, but we don't bring it up to speed to today and put into motion tangible actions. So we're giving you and we're telling you to both study the history, but we're also giving you the practical, up-to-date steps to take now. So make sure you have that balance between the two. So that's why I'm closing out with Nick Westbrook's of Supreme Numerics. Supreme Numerics is the practical study and application of numerology to help you activate your personal power in abundance. And I look forward to seeing you on episode 12. Peace.
Yeah, and Nick did wrap it up nicely. And the fact that, we need to bring what they did in the past to the future, right? If these people were able to build from nothing, think about all the resources we have at our fingertips. Those people had none. We're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, y'all. They probably didn't even have running water. Electricity was not even a thing back then. Imagine everything we have now. There's no excuse. There's no excuse for us to start building, to be honest with you. And so, with every episode, we like to provide you with solutions. We've been threading that out throughout the episodes. Queen and I have been dropping books that you guys should recommend for you to read. But another good thing, we're going back to that, is to do your research. That's the reason why we mention those things. Study Black achievement as much as Black suffering, right? You need to really start putting your own narrative in a better light. Teach your children the true legacy and the ownership and the innovation of Black history, not that slave narrative BS that they're learning in school. Support businesses and institutions that create future opportunities, and focus on building and expanding the right narrative that we are kings and queens. We do come from wealth. Our wealth was stolen, and now we're trying to reclaim our sovereignty once again. So again, this is Dreams, Dollar, and Destiny. I'm Porcha Cooper with Soul Car Studio. I'm closing out with my co-host here, Miss Malinda Valentine and Mr. Westbrooks. See you on the next episode. Take care until then. Peace.